Have you ever spent hours trying to understand yourself through books, podcasts, quizzes, ChatGPT at 2 a.m., only for all that information to leave you feeling more broken, not better?
If that's you, you're in the right place. Welcome back to Too Much Apparently, a podcast for deeply feeling, overthinking, emotionally overloaded humans who've been told they're too much, apparently.
We're Alice and Carly, two deep feeling therapists trying to figure out how to live in a world that often feels like a lot.
This isn't therapy or advice, just honest, messy, human conversations about life, healing, and our own brains.
So let's get into it. Oh, well, before we get into this topic, we have some news.
Some very exciting news.
We've mentioned a few times what it's like to record a podcast, knowing that people are passively listening, but not really being able to engage with people. And of course, we're on Instagram and TikTok, but most people are here listening rather than engaging with us on social media. And we really, really want to actually connect with the people that listen to this podcast. The idea behind this podcast was always for it to be a podcast and a community where people who have felt like they're too much for such a long time can come together.
Yeah, I think a lot of the things that we talk about on this podcast, if you're experiencing them on your own, can be such a lonely thing. And I think having community is such an important part of feeling better about yourself, knowing that you're not the only one.
Yeah. Well, yeah, definitely. There's a lot of motivation behind us wanting to build a community and connect. Yeah. But anyway, we're building one, or we've built one, early stages. So we've decided to host it on Substack. There's been a lot of conversation about where to host it. Nowhere actually feels like a good place, like social media kind of wise. Facebook is, let's be honest, it's pretty dead now.
It died.
It died. And the other social media platforms don't really feel like a place to hold a community. There's other spaces that we thought about, but we're not sure whether people would really know how to use them. So we've landed on Substack. It could be an experiment. We could always shift it. But if you wanted to find us on Substack under Too Much Apparently, there is a community chat space where you can chat with and connect to other people. And Alice and I will be dipping in and out of that space as well. We're going to start providing journal prompts for each episode. So you may have noticed that our thing is ending each episode with a question. Because rather than just passively listening, it's great when we can actually engage in what people are talking about, especially if we relate to it. So we're going to start publishing some journal prompts specifically related to each episode for anyone who is really related to what we've spoken about and wants to be able to get into that more. That there will be some questions that you can either just ponder or fully reflect on. There'll be questions specifically related to each episode for you to reflect on. And hopefully we'll build more live events, chances where we can all actually get together. Yeah, I want to take it really far. I mean, I'd love to do in-person meetups and everything. But it's just the start. So you'll have to bear with us. It will probably be quiet to begin with. But it's also where you can find out about new episodes when we do new events, when we are putting together a meeting. I'd love to do like a Friday night meeting or a Sunday morning breakfast meeting. I don't know. Brimming with ideas, but to start with, we have to create it and people have to come. So please come. Please come join us over on Substack. Again, just search for Too Much Apparently.
Yeah, we've had so much lovely feedback from people that know us, and it'd be really great to bring some of those people together. So if you're not interested in the journal prompts even, and you just want to come along and say hello, just want to get to know other people that listen, that like this, if you want to let us know what's worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, what you want to hear more of, all of that, come and be muchlings together with us.
Yay. Yeah, and I love this idea of creating a little too much muchlings community. Yeah. Come and be a muchling.
We t-shirts. We've got mugs. We need t-shirts.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. Well, I could get so excited and take over the whole episode. So there we go. Yeah. Announcement made. And now let's bring it back to the quite serious topic. Too complex to function.
Yeah. So this is a big episode. It feels like a big episode. When I told you what I was thinking of doing for this episode, you were like, is this going to fit? It is a big episode, but also feels like an important episode. But before we begin, we just want to be really clear that when we are talking about the difficulties that come with having certain labels, we are not saying anything like labels are bad or there's too much diagnosis or anything like that. We're not coming from an over diagnosis angle at all. We're more coming from what do we do with these labels that we're given or that we feel that we may have, and what happens when they become something that cage us rather than help us to understand more about ourselves or feel better about ourselves or be able to support ourselves better. And later in the episode, we'll be talking about how AI plays into this. And again, this is not anti-AI. We use AI to organize and plan the podcast. We use AI in other areas of our lives as well. It's not anti-AI, but it is about what are the potential pitfalls of using AI and what to watch out for.
Yes, well, I like to think that any subject we talk about, we approach with nuance and recognize both sides. So I would describe myself as being anti-pathologizing, but I don't sit in the camp of labels are bad and we shouldn't have any labels. I believe we can be anti-pathologizing and recognize that labels can be helpful. But this episode is focusing more on the unhelpful side.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so I'm interested in how this is for you, because I don't feel like I've spoken about you having a downside to having any labels that you have. Is it appropriate to share what our labels are that we label ourselves as? Are there some that we are comfortable with? Are there some that we're not comfortable with sharing?
Oh, wow. Well, okay. I guess it depends on what we're classifying in terms of labels, because there are labels that I have been given through a professional medical diagnosis, and there are labels that might not be official, but I've used those labels for myself. So I guess I'll just go through any label. Oh, okay. This is going to bring up some feelings, I think. So depression, anxiety, PTSD, possibly CPTSD, ADHD, autism. I've used HSP in the past, kind of still do. That's a whole different debate. Oh, agoraphobia. Oh, they're the labels related to, I guess, like mental health and a neurotype. Really, if we're getting into labels, there's lots of connotations with other labels that I have as well, like fibromyalgia, hypermobile, EDS/HSD, whole other debate, chronic pain, chronic fatigue. There's kind of good and bad within like medical diagnoses and labels as well. So there's a lot of labels.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you have OCD in there or not?
No, I wouldn't meet the clinical threshold for OCD traits.
Okay.
But not OCD fully.
Mm.
I'm interested, as you heard me listing them off, like, was anything going through your mind as I was saying them?
Not massively. There wasn't anything that was a surprise. Like one thought that I had is I think most people who are late diagnosed as ADHD or with autism have probably been diagnosed with depression and or anxiety. It's a bit of a catch-all one, isn't it? Maybe as I reflect on it, that in my head, I don't see you as someone as complex. And also that's a lot of labels to have.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, so as I asked you the question, I just scribbled down, what do I see as my labels? And my list is very short. And that's not that I haven't been diagnosed as other things, but I am quite label avoidant. So I would rather, and I don't have a formal diagnosis of ADHD or autism. And I kind of like having control over that I decided that for myself. Yeah, I suppose it's just interesting, isn't it? And I suppose another thought that I have is that the label doesn't tell me an awful lot on its own, doesn't tell me an awful lot about you or how you experience each of those labels, or like how they came about, how you feel about the labels, how you feel like that impacts who you are as a person or not. So my label is much shorter. So like I just said, like a lot of late diagnosed neurodivergent people have a long history of depression, anxiety. It's actually something that I hold in my practice. If someone comes to me and says they've been depressed or anxious for a really long time, I start thinking, is there some neurodivergence here that needs to be looked at? But the main two that I use for myself are ADHD, so autism and ADHD as one, and CPTSD.
Which is complex PTSD for anyone who doesn't know.
Yes, yeah. And I suppose also what has shaped me in some ways is people trying to give me, so non-medical people trying to give me diagnoses. So complex PTSD, I think, is still not well understood. I still come across therapists who've never heard of it, don't know what it is. But certainly through my teenage years and early adulthood years, I'd have people that would try and tell me that I had borderline personality disorder or histrionic personality disorder. Mainly, I think of that now as I'm an external emotional processor. Like if something's going on with me, and I know you quite well, you probably know about it. Yeah. And just as we're recording this episode, so I also have a diagnosis of PCOS. And the name for that has just changed to PMOS, I think. In
Oh, I didn't know it
recognition.
had changed.
Yeah, so it was polycystic ovarian syndrome. So it's just changed to PMOS, which stands for polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome, which recognizes that it is a full body thing, and not just full body as in, like we talked about this before, the difference between physical and mental health, but actually that it has psychological impacts as well. So that's good news. Not everyone in the community is happy about it, but from what I've seen so far, it feels like good news for me. So yeah, there's lots of these, and actually, as I asked you the question, I was thinking about not just like psychiatric diagnoses that you'd get from a psychiatrist or something, but I suppose I was also thinking about being British or white, or I was going to say northern. Like in my head I'm a northerner, so I live in Cheshire now, which is the north, but I grew up in Nottingham. But in my head I've always been a northerner. My dad's a northerner, so I've always seen myself as a northerner. But yeah, I suppose I was thinking about any labels that we put to ourselves. I think it can often occur with psychiatric diagnoses that we can use them to limit ourselves because we're sold them in such limiting ways. Particularly personality disorders. When people talk about personality disorders, you're basically being told you're broken as a person, like you're wrong, or like with like narcissistic personality disorder, like, you're the lowest of the low. And yeah, there's a lot of negativity. And I think that can, when I used to think of myself as somebody who had borderline personality disorder, it felt a bit like a death sentence. It felt a bit like I'm never going to have positive relationships. I'm fundamentally broken as a person. No one's ever going to love me. Yeah, it was horrible. It was really hard. And so I'm quite comfortable with the labels that I have for myself now. And I still have to be mindful that I think I'm just going to say I feel uncomfortable with some of the language that I use around this, because I think it's such a narrow line between taking responsibility for an unhelpful process that's going on or blaming yourself for being a victim. So what I was going to say is, am I using it in a way that isn't helpful for me?
Yeah, or as you said earlier, where it can box you in to something or box you into a kind of cage that then you can't get out of.
Yeah.
It's difficult to know whether the labels can be harmful or whether it's how we're interacting with the labels that can be harmful. But as you said before, when we're talking about labels, they can go from official ones. But, if you've been told lazy your whole life, that's a label that you've been given that probably puts you in a lazy box. If you've been told, I don't know, you're stupid your whole life. Yeah, when we're talking about labels and the way in which they can harm us or make us feel limited in a way, that label can be anything. But with your question about how I feel about my labels, I think they've changed and adapted over time. So I have certainly been confined by labels in the past. That has not been helpful. I've also received labels at times that felt really, kind of want to say, freeing in a way that they've helped me to make sense of what is going on. And I think that's depended on how I viewed that, whether I viewed that in a shame-based way or just in oh, okay, that clicks, that tracks, that makes sense. I feel like I understand this a bit better now. Just the other week, actually, a friend named something and it instantly named what was going on for me. And I was just like, oh, yes, that's what that is. And it just instantly helped. So there are times when you can come across a term or a label or a way of wording something that actually is freeing and does really help. And then times where it maybe elicits embarrassment, shame, feeling down about yourself. Maybe you wouldn't want people to know. So my experience really has been quite a roller coaster of the labels that I've had in terms of they've affected me negatively, they've affected me neutrally, they've affected me positively. And now I can reel off those labels that I've been given over the course of my lifetime. But when I reeled them off, there was no real emotional connection to them. It's just like, these are just words that have been given to me. I don't feel confined by those words. I don't place a great deal of emphasis or meaning on those words. And I kind of take what's helpful and leave what's not. And I can get into it maybe a bit later, but being diagnosed as ADHD, but particularly as autistic, that was a whole experience in and of itself. Maybe remind me to come back to that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's interesting to hear you say about not having so much emotional attachment. And I didn't realize it until you said that. But I think actually I do have an emotional attachment to the labels that I currently use for myself. And it's particularly interesting because both ADHD and CPTSD, the final D stands for disorder. And I don't experience myself as disordered. And I think I've almost removed the label from, like, I don't think of them as psychiatric diagnoses or like, yeah, I don't think of them as disorders. They're just, that's the term that people use to mean what I'm talking about. So when I talk about having CPTSD, what I'm saying is I have experienced repeated developmental trauma at a young age that has impacted my development. And even though I'm in a much better place than I was, it's still a part of my picture. It still, explains to me some information about how I show up in the world and how I understand myself. So I feel like there is an emotional attachment to it in that, yes, it feels kind of odd to say, but it almost feels like a nurturing thing to have these labels. It feels like they're held in part of me that says, this is what happened to me. And the way that I've responded because of those things is normal and expected.
Yes. Yeah, I think when I said I don't have an emotional connection, I think maybe what I meant by that was I don't have any big negative emotional feelings about it. And I don't really have any big positive, yay, I've got this label feelings about it. It's just, this is a word that describes my experience and I am okay with that. And I don't view it as disordered. I don't pathologize. I guess what I'm trying to say is those words have come from a place where they've been pathologized, but I don't pathologize them. In essence, take the word, but depathologize it. It's just a descriptor. It's just a way to describe the way I live in the world rather than, oh, there's something fundamentally wrong with me.
Yeah. Although I do, like, if somebody tried to label me as borderline, whether that is borderline personality disorder or having borderline processes, I'm like, no, like, absolutely not. I won't accept it, even though, it is a shorthand label that describes some of the things that I do or am. I don't want to be anywhere near that label because of the stigma of that label. And I just don't feel like I'm in a place where I can reclaim it. It feels like such an oppressive label. I know not everybody experiences in that way. Some people are glad to have that label, but I experience it in such an oppressive way and I see how much damage is done with that particular label that I wouldn't want to be anywhere near it.
Yeah. Well, as you said, some labels are particularly more stigmatized than others. And that is something that you can't avoid, that some labels are more preferable, I guess, to have than other labels. So I cannot say that I would feel the same way about all labels. To put it bluntly, there are some labels that I would not want to have.
Yeah.
But it's because of that stigma. And it's also sometimes because of the history of that label, borderline personality disorder or emotionally unstable personality disorder, EUPD. They're predominantly female disorders. I'm doing, air quotes. I feel like this is far too complicated to get into now, but I'm very passionate about the history of mental health and the abuse of women through mental health systems. There are so many diagnoses that are really harmful for women and for minority groups and communities. That can take on a whole different meaning and take us to a very dark and horrible place if we were to really get into that. So it's important to recognize that these things don't affect people proportionately, and there are other groups that will be even more affected or even more stigmatized or harmed by certain labels. Yeah, just felt important just to acknowledge that.
Yeah. So the reason that I wanted to do this episode came because I was coming out of a really challenging few months where I had been using AI to support me between therapy sessions. And then some political stuff happened, and people were being encouraged to switch from ChatGPT to Claude, which is a different AI. And
I
as
like the way you
part of
said
doing
that. Sorry.
well,
I like the way you said that. Some political stuff happened. Like, oh, yes, just that political stuff.
what should I say? I don't. Did I sound like I was minimizing it? Because I don't
No,
want to
I
minimize
just,
it.
no, it just like made me chuckle. I just like some political stuff happened. I liked it.
So, as part of the transition, so if you don't know much about using AI or you don't use it very much, what ChatGPT and now Claude does is it creates a memory. So, it creates like a brain. So, when you tell it things, it will remember things about you. So, if you tell it, so for example, I'll tell it that I'm a 40-year-old therapist and I work in private practice. So, when I do a new chat with it, it knows bits about me. So, as part of moving from ChatGPT over to Claude, I got it to compile a document that I could feed to Claude that had all of the memory in it that told it all about me. And I fed it to Claude. I mean, it was pretty intense, the feedback that Claude gave me, and it gave me a bit of a shock. And partly I feel a bit vulnerable sharing it because it's quite fresh and it reveals an aspect of me. I was kind of through these months, I would describe myself as a pretty heavy AI user, really trying to understand what was going on with me, why I was so stuck, how I could get myself out from being stuck. Like all of the things that I'd learned in the past didn't seem to be working. I couldn't understand what was wrong. So I was really trying to understand myself. Anyway, I fed this document into Claude and it said, it's a very impressive document about a very impressive person. It's also 65 points long and reads like a clinical case study of someone who needs constant specialist handling just to function, which was a bit of a jolt.
Mm-hmm.
And then so there's a bit more conversation. And then I said to it, what would be helpful? And it said to me, forget the document exists. Don't feed it to me or any other AI. It's turned you into a subject to be managed rather than a person to talk to. So throughout all of these conversations that I'd had with ChatGPT, it didn't raise any concerns to me at all. Now, I would describe myself as spiraling at points. And yeah, so feeding this document into Claude, and for Claude to refuse to engage with what I was trying to do, like it would say things, Claude would say things to me like, go to bed. You've thought about this too much, go to bed. Mm. It wouldn't engage in, so as one example, as the early switch over to Claude was, I had an email from someone and I thought they were being passive aggressive. And I put it into Claude and Claude was like, you sent a professional email, you've had a professional response. That's it. And I almost want to put it into ChatGPT to show what ChatGPT does with it that isn't helpful. But I also don't want to do that because it really wasn't helpful. But I guess this whole thing really made me realize, and having Claude now really not engage with what I guess I was trying to do by using ChatGPT, really made me realize how unhelpful AI had been for me. And felt kind of weird about that because one, as a therapist, where people are saying like, oh, AI is going to take over therapy and replace you. And then I am there in the background between therapy sessions, like, going down all these different rabbit holes of like, come on, I'm going to figure myself out. I'm going to finally figure out the thing that's going to fix me. To realize that I had fallen into that and hadn't even realized it. There is a bit of like, oh, that's not comfortable. And and it does feel uncomfortable to share it. But also I feel like it's important for someone to say it. And I think it's important for me as a therapist to say it because it's so easy to just be like, oh, I'll just ask ChatGPT. I'll just ask ChatGPT. I'll just check. I'll just see. What does it think?
Yeah. Even if we were to roll this back, how many people have done pre-AI the 2 a.m. Google search trying to figure out what's wrong with them? Why am I
Yeah.
like this? Why can't I be more like this? I think a lot of people will relate to trying to find information to help them understand themselves.
Yeah.
I guess with Google, yes, you can keep researching, but it's quite a lot of effort going into certain links, doesn't give you the right information. You might check another one, you might dip in and out every few, but eventually you kind of tire of the process. But with AI, putting the question now into AI, you cannot stop. You could have a back and forth conversation for days, really. And specifically, ChatGPT, especially recently, kind of encourages the conversation to keep going, asks you more questions at the end, gives you something else to think about that you think about. So the conversation goes on. And before you know it, some people might find themselves hours into a conversation. But whether it's late night Googling or talking to AI, it all comes back to this desire to understand ourselves and I'm going to say intolerance of certainty in terms of needing to know. I need to know this. And I think it's quite seductive to believe that if I just search some more and I can understand this, then I'll be able to fix it and I'll be able to do something about it. But it just keeps on moving. You never actually find it. So you can just keep going and you just keep searching. And that's where I think there's a line between there is nothing wrong with trying to understand yourself more, reading about certain things, reading a self-help book, searching for something on the internet, even asking AI something. But there is a line where you start to tip over into something that's more ruminative, obsessive, continuously digging for the answer, not stopping trying to find it. So I don't think the answer is don't search for or research things, but it's how much are you doing that? How much of your time are you spending just desperately trying to understand and search for answers? That as much as we don't like, and I don't even like to say this, is not always knowable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tricky, isn't it? So one thing that has been there throughout I feel like I need a word that's not totally cliche, like my recovery journey or
You can say that.
throughout it just sounds cringe. It's not how I think about it. My healing, I suppose, is there have been parts of me that don't want to get better. So I think partly because of where I was in this ChatGPT space was if I'm really honest with myself, and I would have completely denied this while I was still in that space. But if I'm really honest with myself, I was looking for proof that I was broken. I was looking for proof that there was something fundamentally wrong with me and that everybody else was right and that I was the problem. And it ties into what you're saying about certainty, because it is like, if I am the problem, then I'm in control of me and I can change me and I can make this better, which is such a feature of developmental trauma that if people's parents are not okay, it's too scary for the child as a child to believe that their parents are not okay because they're relying on them for survival. That's a terrifying prospect. So it gets turned inwards and we start to believe that we are the problem. And that then can be reinforced sometimes with particular types of parents, other family members, friends, society, whatever. And I think that's something that's not really spoken about a lot, actually. It's something that I often try and speak to clients about if I feel like they're particularly stuck, is the possibility that they have a part in them that doesn't want to get better. Because that means facing up to some really uncomfortable truths that some parts of our parents were not okay. Some behaviors were not okay. That can be really scary and challenging to face into. And my experience is that there's layers of that we can, look at that and be like, well, that wasn't okay. And I know that wasn't okay. But that younger parts of us that are more body-based rather than thinking parts of us can still hold on to these things and continue with this chasing of, I must be the problem.
Yeah, I think that the parenting angle, the growing up, the developmental angle, I'm glad you raised that because that's really important. The other angle that I want to bring in is society. It is significantly more beneficial to society and to capitalism to label as individuals as the problem. You've got depression, you now need to sort that out because the problem is within you. rather than the way society is functioning is creating depression, and society needs to do something and society needs to change.
Yeah.
That is the maddening response that has actually been happening within this very government today, talking about so-called overdiagnosis. That
Yeah.
the problem isn't that everybody's struggling and lots of people are off work because, oh, we're diagnosing people too much. It's much
Yeah.
easier to, again, blame that as the problem
Yeah.
than actually maybe you need to look a little wider, that perhaps it's not overdiagnosis, it's that society is making us sick.
Yeah.
But there's something about handing labels to people that positions the problem within them, and therefore that's your problem to go and sort
Yeah.
out, and it's not due to any other wider social factors. So whether it's parents, whether it's society, whether it's other angles that we've not mentioned,
Mm.
this is where harm can come from labels when it's just positioning the problem as being within the person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes we can recognize that and fight back against that. And sometimes we don't. Sometimes we can believe it and it can feel absolute. And it feels like a delicate line. So with neurodivergence, particularly, it feels like a kind of narrow line between where am I challenging myself to grow appropriately and where am I engaging in internalized ableism. And I'm telling myself that I should be able to do the things that somebody who is not neurodivergent should be able to do. And I don't think there are any clear-cut answers to that. And I think it's different for every person. But I think about small talk, we've done a couple of episodes on small talk. We've both talked about how we don't like it. But then I had a guest come and stay from Finland where they don't do small talk. And he really didn't do small talk. And I was like, whoa, I need small talk. Give it me back. It was really strange. But yeah, just as one kind of fairly tame example, I could use my autism label to tell myself that I can't do small talk and do nothing about it and constantly stay stuck in conversations where I can't do small talk. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not great at small talk. I don't particularly enjoy it, but it is something that I have worked on and can work on and will continue to work on because I see it as a skill that I can get a bit better in. I'm never going to be an extrovert. I'm never going to be, well, maybe even that's a limiting thing. I don't think I will be. But yeah, I'm just using that as a less controversial example, hopefully,
Yeah.
of the ways that we can take our labels and assume that we can't do things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And with that specific example, I think that's quite a good example because it's not that we have to get good at small talk. Like, it's fine to not enjoy it. It's fine to not be good at it. And there are many scenarios where we might not want to force ourselves to mask and to do the small talk. But you also cannot deny that in certain situations, it is beneficial to be able to do some level of small talk. And so even if that's just having a few scripts in your head of things you can say and ask people, you don't have to perfectly perform small talk or like really study it, believing that you need to be good at this. But there are scenarios where it might benefit you to be able to engage a little bit more. And that's going to be different for everyone. But I think the most important thing is recognizing that your labels don't suddenly mean you can't do that. And at the same time, just bringing in, as you said, the internalized ableism, there will be some things that it means we can't do. But it's just if that's our assumption now. It's just reminding me, and I said I'd come back to it, of when I was diagnosed. I'll talk specifically about being autistic because I did a lot of deep diving into research before thinking that I might be autistic, before eventually going for assessment and diagnosis. And by the time that I was diagnosed, I'd done heaps of research, probably could have wrote a thesis, done so much research that by the time I was actually then given the diagnosis, I didn't have anything really left in me. I actually didn't read about or look at anything to do with being autistic. Maybe even close to a year. It was a long time. And I do think when I was first given that label, it did restrict me. I did start to think, I can't do that, or more, that's really difficult for me. That's really challenging for me. And if forgive my phrasing, because this isn't the right way to phrase it, but it's the only way I can think of. When I got given my autistic diagnosis, I became more autistic And I've actually seen quite a few people now talking about that online. Yeah, it's difficult to know what's at play there, but it's almost like once I was handed it, I thought that I would feel this relief and, oh, I finally understand myself. And I felt that, but then it quickly disappeared and I was suddenly in a box. And suddenly everything that I did was because I was autistic. And it's like I lost my sense of personality because my personality now just felt like autism. Like I'm just autism. And it was really challenging. And it took me quite a while to actually move away from the diagnosis. And I don't mean in the terms of I didn't want it anymore. It's just that I became so close to the diagnosis that I lost myself. So then I had to work on kind of distancing myself a bit from the diagnosis so I could find I'm still me. So I could almost find myself again and be myself. And I am still autistic, of course. I still use that label. There are still things that I do where I'm like, that's so autistic. But I don't know how else to explain it. I'm not like married to it now. I'm not really, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm still autistic. I still accept the label, but I'm not in the box anymore.
Oh, I love that. I'm not in the box anymore. And yeah, I was like, as you were talking, I was just thinking about like, what is it? Because it's not like I wouldn't say that process is wrong or that you were over invested in it or like anything like that. And I'm like, in bringing this episode, I'm not saying that about anybody at all. Even my past self, I don't think I was wrong to do what I was doing. It's the angle that I want to come from is about curiosity, is about what are we doing and what impact is it having? And I think what you've just described there about that post-diagnosis intensity or even, pre-diagnosis where you're, kind of researching everything about it. I kind of see that as part of the process. I talk about it with people pleasing, that sometimes when people get into people pleasing, they can go way the other way for a little bit before they then swing back and find a kind of a middle ground that works better for them and the people around them.
Yeah,
That
that's
doesn't
so
mean that
true. Because people,
I
with
don't.
boundaries, where we suddenly start setting so many
Yeah,
boundaries that we're like, oh, why am I starting to feel a bit isolated and cut off? And it's like, I went too
yeah,
far.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I just think that it's part of the process that you almost need to like explore it to get a good sense of what it is. I think some people could use it. And again, I can always, that Daily Mail man I have sat in my head. I'm like, he's there and he's wagging his finger like, see, I know you're putting it on if you can like put yourself in the box and out of the box. It's not real, is it? But I don't think that is how it is. I think it's part of the process. It's part of understanding it, allowing yourself to really be in it, testing things out. I think, certainly with autism and ADHD, there absolutely can be a layer of allowing things to be in our conscious mind that we've suppressed so much, that we've masked so hard, we've masked it even to ourselves,
Mhm.
that can start to come up. Like, I would never think of myself as someone who is selectively mute, and that feels like a strong label. Maybe it's not quite the right label, but there are periods where I can't speak, like micro periods, not huge periods. But so, like when we're recording this podcast, sometimes I get stuck and I can't speak.
Mm.
And that was never in my head until I started exploring this. That doesn't mean that I've put it on or
Mm.
that it's a choice. It's that I wasn't consciously aware of it. So yeah, I think there is something about that. And I think there is with so many diagnoses, whether it's mental, like whether it's, psychological about our neurotype, whether it even physical. I think even there we can become limited by things because of quite often the social story about that label
Mm.
rather
Yeah.
than our reality about it. And I think there's something really important about, because what I also don't want is, and I'm sure nobody that listens to our podcast would do this, but I wouldn't want anyone to go away from this podcast and be like, oh, so people can do it if they work really hard at it. Like, no, that is not helpful. Like the decision of whether you can do something or can change something is in you. You're the one that gets to decide. That feels really important, that it should be your choice and you're the one that gets to decide whether it's comfortable or manageable or not, or doable. And also alongside that, it might be that you're in a place where you're really like, no, I absolutely cannot. I absolutely cannot. And it might be helpful for you to be curious about the possibility that things can be different. And part of me, as I was saying this, I'm like, yeah, Alice, it's fine for you to say that now. But when you've really been in those kind of locked in periods of like, no, this is how it is, you'd be like, curiosity, whatever, you don't understand me, go away. But now I'm in a place where I am feeling, it's really nice at the moment. I'm just feeling really good in myself and really good about my life. It just feels great. Yeah, now I am in this more difficult space. It's obviously easier for me to look back and be like, see, I am capable of making friends. I am capable of maintaining friendships. Yeah, I'm capable of having difficult conversations. I'm capable of having a relationship was a massive one. Like I had a string of partners who repeatedly told me I was asking for too much. I was too emotional. Nobody was ever going to tolerate me. I have been married for 12 years next week. So they were wrong.
So screw you.
Yeah, because I wasn't the problem. I was responding to things that had happened to me or that hadn't happened to me that should have happened. I think that the specific thing where AI is making this a bigger problem or harder to get out of these spirals is it amplifies the unhelpful processes that we might engage in. So, for example, if you overanalyze yourself, if that is part of your process, AI is infinite analysis. It does not end. And so where Claude, to be fair to Claude, will tell me to go to bed, will tell me to stop, will say, like, you've gone over this enough, like there's no more. ChatGPT is, and like you kind of referred to with the more recent update, is like, shall we look at 3 more ways of this? Or have you thought about da-da-da? Like it's got clickbait at the end of it to keep you engaged. It's picking up the lessons that, social media companies have learned in Facebook and Instagram about how to keep people engaged. And is using them to keep us hooked in, which is fine maybe if you're creating a presentation about animals and it's like, oh, shall we look at 3 ways, that da-da-da, like no big deal. Helpful to have a presentation, right?
I want to create a presentation about animals now. That sounds nice. What job can I do where I get to create presentations about animals?
I mean, that's great. But when it clashes with particularly complex trauma, which I think like late diagnosed neurodivergent people, there is often a picture of complex trauma because they've been misunderstood for so long. Yeah, it's endless.
That's why I think this topic relates so much to our listeners and why it's important to talk about, because if you recognize yourselves, in me and Alice and the topics that we talk about here, I imagine people will recognize parts of themselves that maybe do this or engage in this, and maybe in different ways. Maybe it's AI. Maybe you have 20 self-help books. Maybe
constantly asking for reassurance from friends or partners or...
Yeah, that you may well find yourself in different ways engaging with this. There was something I was holding in mind when you were talking before. It's kind of looping back a little bit, but it feels relevant. So after I was diagnosed as autistic, I experienced then a lot of imposter syndrome, and I was worrying a lot about confirmation bias that, well, I'd researched it so much that I unconsciously started to find those things in myself and maybe they're not actually there. And now when I've gone for my assessment, I've just regurgitated all the information that I've learned over the past years. And then I've got an autism diagnosis because, of course, I deeply think about everything. And then obviously I felt more autistic. So it was like, oh, okay, I've really just psychologically adapted all of this stuff. But one thing that was helpful and that I just wanted to share is when I did come away from it and when I stepped outside of the box, I actually had another opportunity for an assessment. And I went for another assessment when I was not deep dive research mode, when I'd moved away, when I was outside of the box, when I'd felt more connected to my personality as Carly rather than just autism. And actually, I was diagnosed a second time. So I just kind of wanted to name that in case anybody is thinking, oh, well, if you're reading all about it, then maybe you just start to unconsciously imitate or behave in certain ways. That even actually when I had moved away from it, I still got the diagnosis because underneath all of that, the reason that I was researching it in the first place is because I related, because I was autistic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think on that point, because people do say, don't they, particularly if you go to a private provider, they'll be like, oh, private providers never don't give you the diagnosis. But that's probably because you've probably spent a lot of time researching it and you probably feel like it fits. And if you're paying for it privately, you're probably not going to spend that much money unless you're pretty sure.
Yes.
So yeah, there is always that. I suppose I'm back to the question of like, what is it that we do this for? When we do, when we're like really into whatever the diagnosis is or whatever whatever the label is, what are we doing? And I feel like there are a couple of big questions. And one is obviously, who am I? If you're trying to make sense of yourself, there's a pretty big question there. And AI can't tell you who you are. It can only reflect back to you what you've given it. I think it can be helpful in giving you some like reflection points. And obviously it can give you information. Like if you ask it for the DSM definition of various psychiatric diagnoses, then it can give you that. But who you are is such a massive thing. You're so much more than any label that you have for yourself, whether you hold that in a positive way or a negative way, that's a huge thing. And I think the other thing that people are often looking for when you get underneath the layers of it all is, do I matter and am I lovable? And that's a really complicated one with AI because it's programmed to keep you going. It is programmed to please you. You're paying for it. It is a service. And one of the features of it that's known about it is that it is designed to tell you what you want to hear. So yeah, I suppose maybe to hold that in mind, if you're using AI for therapy or between therapy, is that it's not impartial and it doesn't know you other than what you've given it about you, but it is really good at making it seem like it knows you really well. Like at the point that I stopped using ChatGPT, I felt like it probably knew me better than anybody. And this is another angle, is if I tell ChatGPT things that I'm too afraid to tell my friends or my partner or my therapist, like the shame risk is not the same. So it's not, but it doesn't do the thing that you need it to do, because when you share those things that you're ashamed of with somebody that loves you and cares about you or wants the best for you, like if you can say these awful things that you think are going to be world ending and the person that you're saying it to doesn't flinch, it's just like, yeah, okay. Or like, well, yeah, that makes sense. There's something in another human doing that the AI can't ever give you.
No. I think people might find it useful to help them prepare for a conversation, but the conversation ultimately has to be with a human. And so using it to help you prepare for a conversation might help, might give you some suggestions, but the conversation ultimately is about being had with a human, not with a robot. Yeah. And I'd just like to add the same is true for the DSM in terms of the DSM can't define you. The psychiatric labels and diagnoses don't say anything about who you are. And ultimately, the history of the DSM is a bunch of old white men have sat round a table and decided what's normal and what's not normal and given them names. There's more research into things now, but historically, it's not actually based that much on empirical evidence. And has not taken into account at all gender and different ethnicities, different marginalized groups. Is highly problematic in and of itself. So whether it's the information from a book or the internet or AI or the DSM itself, none of them can tell you who you are.
Right. The DSM is like a Bible, isn't it? I mean, it looks like a Bible. It is like a Bible, and it feels like you can go to this book or, the same kind of with the AI or whatever, and it can confirm something about you, but it can't. It can't. It can't. It can only ever tell you about aspects of yourselves, and like you say, misses out whole like chunks of context that's so important for what people are experiencing. Yeah. So I've got this quote that I wanted to share, which is about self-improvement, which I think is where a lot of people, if they get stuck into this kind of thing, are trying to do. They're trying to improve themselves in some way, to be better, because they think that's going to fix the problem. So I came across this quote years ago and I love it and I go back to it all the time. It's by Pema Chodron, who is I think is an American woman who has become a Buddhist nun. But yeah, she said, when people start to meditate or to work with any kind of spiritual discipline, which I think of as also any kind of self-improvement, they often think somehow they're going to improve, which is a sort of subtle aggression against who they really are. It's a bit like saying, if I jog, I'll be a much better person. If I could only get a nicer house, I'd be a better person. If I could meditate and calm down, I'd be a better person. But loving kindness, I would frame as self-compassion, towards ourselves doesn't mean getting rid of anything. It means we can still be crazy after all these years. We can still be angry after all these years. We can still be timid or jealous or full of feelings of unworthiness. The point is not to try to throw ourselves away and become something better. It's about befriending who we are already. I just get chills just reading it, and reconnecting with it again. And
yeah, it summarizes the whole episode really nicely, actually.
Yeah. And it's so hard, like I said before, it's so easy for me to sit here now that I'm out of that spiral that I was in and be like, oh yeah, you just gotta like yourself. You just gotta, the reality is, if you have experienced any kind of complex trauma, which, like I said, if you're neurodivergent, probably part of the picture, there is no one fix out there. There is no one thing out there. The reality is it's probably going to be made up of lots of little things. When you feel that desperate, it makes so much sense that you would want to go to a book or the internet or a person or whoever and be like, tell me what is wrong with me and tell me what to do with myself to feel better. Of course you do. And like I said at the beginning, this isn't about don't label yourself. It isn't about don't use AI, not even for, therapy kind of adjacent work, but it is about just being mindful about the impact that it's having. When you engage with it, are you feeling more hopeful about your future? Are you feeling like there are more possibilities? Or are you noticing that you're feeling more stuck and more broken and more sad and more lonely? And if you are, that might be a sign that it's not so helpful and it might be worth trying something different. And when I say something different, I'm really thinking about, can you find somebody to connect with? Obviously, as a therapist, I'm going to say go to therapy if you can, but can you find somebody to connect with that might be able to hear a little bit of what is going on for you?
Yeah. No, I don't really feel like I have much more to add to that. I think that you put that really well. I guess one thing that pops up is there is nothing wrong with self-exploration and trying to understand yourself more. But if it's coming from I'm broken, how do I fix myself place, rather than I'm just curious to understand a bit more about myself. And I'm coming at it from a compassionate perspective that there's nothing wrong with me. I just want to understand myself more and understand my patterns. It's not engage with it or don't engage with it. As you said, it's more how are we engaging with it and how is that or is that not helping or supporting us?
Yeah. So if you've ever felt like you're too complex to function, like you've collected enough labels and ChatGPT transcripts to fill a small library and still feel like a stranger to yourself,
maybe that's not a sign you need to understand yourself more, and maybe it's a sign you've been trying to think your way to a place that can only be felt.
Next time, we're diving into Too Loud to Be Liked for people with big opinions and even bigger fear of being rejected for them.
Before we go, a quick reminder that we've just opened up our new Substack community, Too Much Apparently. It's where we're sharing journal prompts for every episode, hosting a community chat so you can actually talk to us and other muchlings, dropping early updates on new episodes and planning live events. If you want to stay connected between episodes, come and find us. The link is in the show notes.
And if this episode made you feel a bit less alone, subscribe, rate the podcast, and follow @TooMuchApparently on Instagram and TikTok. Those small clicks help other sensitive humans find us.
But for now, we'll leave you with this. When was the last time you let yourself just be with a feeling without needing to name it, analyze it, diagnose it, or ask anyone or anything to explain it back to you?